Hi there, it's Terry Singh again at Cannes VMworld 2008. We have a running third day. A lot of interviews, a lot of chief executive officers, C-level and executive staff of several companies and several layers in virtualization. As you may have followed, all the videos are already on the internet as we speak. I have a very influential and very important person from Virtual Iron. Obviously, you guys know what Virtual Iron. These guys are into the virtualization area and competing with vendors like VMware and every other virtualization vendor that we know. So welcome Mike Grandinetti. He is the Chief Marketing Officer of Virtual Iron. Hi Mike, how are you doing?
Terry, thanks for having me. Really a pleasure to finally meet you after following your blog and emailing one another, so thanks so much for having the chance to talk today.
It's great to really meet in flesh and blood, Mike, so I'm really happy to meet you. And how have you been experiencing here? Did you arrive today? Or?
I arrived yesterday. Came in yesterday morning. And the last time I was in Cannes, I had spent a year backpacking across Europe right after I finished engineering school. And I wound up in Cannes. It was lovely then, it's lovely now. It's great to get out of Boston where we had about 1.5 feet of snow on the ground. But to see this event take off as quickly as the inaugural event in Europe, it's quite impressive to see the level of energy, the level of traffic here. I'm in awe of...
And the amount of people, it's amazing. They were expecting, I was talking to the organizer, the guy we interviewed, the very first interview, Richard Garsthagen, the very hardworking gentleman, good friend of mine.
Yeah.
They were expecting like 3,400 kind of people, and I thought 3,000, and they have 4,600.
Oh yeah, and it's obviously very crowded, and there are times down there on the floor when it's a little tough to move around, but probably a better venue for next time, right? It's just a very unusual layout. Obviously, it's an older venue.
Yeah.
I mean, love Cannes, love looking at the ocean, but next time maybe a slightly more wide open venue.
Depends, yeah. But you never know. I mean, hey,
Right.
in a year's time, if you have a VMworld 2009, they might probably want to be looking for a smaller VMworld. You never know. I mean,
you never know, right?
It depends how the world changes with virtualization. That's the beauty of the whole crazy transitional mode that we are all in, where things are changing. So, Mike, you've been heading Virtual Iron for a long time. You also do a lot of your afterlife, or your day. We're going to talk about it maybe later.
Yep.
Just tell us about Virtual Iron. What is Virtual Iron? How did you guys get started? Just brief history about Virtual Iron.
Yeah, absolutely. So Virtual Iron is a server virtualization software company. We've been around between 3 and 4 years. And the initial founding premise of the company was to deliver a data center operating system experience. So a lot of the things that you're hearing from VMware today, which is transparent workload migration, full high availability and disaster recovery capabilities, dynamic capacity management or load balancing, those are things that were literally in the founding business plan of the company, and we're really in version 1.0 of the product. Now, as you probably know, we went through a transition after 1.0 to 2.0 where we moved through a proprietary hypervisor where we adopted the Xen open source hypervisor. But I think we've been an innovator in many ways in the industry. I think we've always seen that the real benefit was to go beyond server consolidation and to really help people realize the benefits of utility or cloud computing, something that's become a lot more commonly talked about today.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that is the world, that is the next step. That's what I said, the transitional, and then we have a transformation.
Right.
I think the world is going to be looking more at transformation because that's exactly where real innovation is going to come out. But you guys are doing a great job. About the product line, obviously we know the hypervisor, we can talk about it. It's the hypervisor itself.
Right.
But I'm sure you guys are into that 2.0, which also means you're totally into management, and that's the thing which the consumer wants. That's why we're talking here.
Right, yeah. So we've created a virtualization stack, and I'd say it's very analogous to VMware, at least as you look at the different features and capabilities. I think there's some very fundamental differences, though, and while I think we both deliver a lot of the same benefits, I think we've taken very different architectural approaches, right? And to just very quickly explain some of the salient differences, VMware is still using sort of full hosted OS, but they're not taking full advantage of the new server or chip-assisted virtualization, right? So we're doing bare metal virtualization today, and that allows for a far more compact hypervisor, a lot less surface area to attack. So with Mendel's speech of this morning around security, I think we anticipated some of the challenges of virtual security, and we built sort of just enough hypervisor, if you will, just enough of the stack. So we include the Novell SLES 10 kernel and drivers, and we get a lot of the benefit of commercial support across, literally thousands of different data center elements, server, storage, and network elements as a result of that. One of the things that we've also pioneered is, if you talk to the analysts, if you talk to the marketplace, the thing that you hear constantly is, why has VMware, after 10 years of a lot of success, only penetrated the market 5, 6, or 7%?
Very good point, yeah.
And I think the answer you get consistently, whether you talk to the top tier analyst, you talk to the VAR channel, you talk to a lot of prospects and customers, is that cost and complexity are the two biggest gating items. And complexity really at the top of the list. Because as you try to move beyond the very large enterprises that VMware has had its early success in, and you then begin to look at a mainstream IT shop, they don't have Linux skills, right? They're not prepared to deal with a lot of the complexities of doing Linux command line program to do physical installation on a server by server or blade by blade basis. They don't have the ability to manage clustered and proprietary file systems. They don't have the ability to work through shared storage. Right?
But that's a step that goes the next, that's the next level. So, hey, sales guy comes in and says, hey, buy a product.
Right.
Oh, I want to first test it because I don't know if I want to buy it because of the price or whatever reason that might be. The first hurdle, you pass the first hurdle, you get some test licenses, you test, and then you have these Linux problems.
Right.
I don't see it as a Linux problem, actually.
Yeah, right.
Like you said, they say just enough hypervisor. It's going to be called because Srinivas, one of the VMware guys, he's the one who was first blogged about it, calling it YEOS.
Right,
just enough operating system kind of thing. Yeah. Compress. I keep talking. I spoke to Fastscale, one of the firms. They're busy compressing.
Right.
One, there are more challenges. We all know it.
No question.
There are challenges, and like you mentioned yourself, the pricing is not the only thing. In political, go to a company and tell we're going to take a data center and overall, but it's ready for a total overhaul.
Yes.
And you have departmentalization, and you have political problems. So that and put a good fat price tag.
Right.
It's hard to sell a product.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think that the good news is server virtualization has been around now for 10 years, right? And give VMware credit. They've got 20,000 plus customers. They've done a brilliant job
They're doing an excellent job.
Documenting the ROI and documenting a lot of the economic benefit. And so everybody sees that and say, I want some of that, right? So there are very few companies that don't see virtualization as something they want to do. The question is it accessible to them? Can they deal with it from a complexity point of view, and then can they afford it? And what we're seeing at Virtual Iron, right? So we've announced recently we have 1,500 end user deployments. Took us about 13 months to get there. Took VMware 8 years to publicly announce their 1,500 customer. Why is that? I think one of the reasons is because so many of our customers are in small and mid-sized enterprises. They move through their evaluation process far more rapidly. So if you look at a lot of the VMware IPO offering documents, the gestation period from bringing in that first ESX host, doing a small pilot, rolling out departmentally, and then moving it across a large part of the data center, it's a 2 or 3 year process. When you're selling to smaller enterprises, what you see is they move into production sometimes in 60 or 90 days, so they're much quicker, much higher velocity. But the thing that I think has been very interesting to us is that VMware sees that as a second-class citizenship opportunity. So they're trying to sell them server. They want to go to the Fortune 500 at the very, very premium prices. And I think that long-term, with Microsoft's entry,
2 million customers.
Yeah, right. I think they've missed an opportunity, right? They've missed an opportunity to own the whole market. So what we're hearing from our 1,500 customers and our prospects is they want all the goods. They want all the capabilities. They don't want to settle, make any compromises. And what's amazing is they're consuming all these capabilities. But they're doing it because we're making it easy for them to do so. We're making it more accessible for them.
Does that mean that you guys are working better with Microsoft, or how is the relationship with Microsoft and Citrix, given the fact that these guys are coming in as well in the coming months or a half a year, 2-quarter time?
Citrix, I mean, there's no question that the ZenSource company that preceded Citrix, or Citrix ZenSource.
Yeah, that's how I mean ZenSource.
Yeah,
Zen,
I mean, I think it's. I don't think it's an industry secret to say that ZenSource has struggled to deliver good commercialization on top of the Zen hypervisor. I think most people would acknowledge that pretty readily. From what we've seen since the acquisition of ZenSource by Citrix in August, there's been a dramatic slowdown in terms of what they've been able to deliver, and that's classic in any acquisition. So that's not just specific to Citrix.
Yeah, it's a process.
It's a process, and it takes some time. We saw over the last day or two that Citrix made a public announcement that what they had promised Wall Street, $50 million in revenue this year, they're now decommitting from that, and they're backing off to $38 million. Next year, they committed very publicly and reinforced that just a month ago to $200 million. They're now backing off that. And again, anybody that understands how OEMs ramp and how revenue ramps we saw that coming back in August, so there's no surprise there. So I think Citrix is going to have some challenges only in that they've acquired a lot of companies over the last 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of confusion in their channel. How do all these different pieces fit together? Is there a cohesive story? What do I sell today? How do I sell it? So they've got some challenges, right? But will they be formidable? Absolutely. What people fail to recognize is that Citrix has largely been selling into the large enterprise in the PCIT group. ZenSource has been selling into the small enterprise, into the server IT group. So there's not as much dovetailing between those two assets. And I think there's a real challenge bringing those pieces together.
Absolutely.
Now, Microsoft is Microsoft, and we all know that they don't have to have a great product to win. I know that our friend Paul Venezia from InfoWorld did a review of Hyper-V in beta in December, and Paul, being one of the most technically astute guys you'll ever meet in our space, said it's basically nothing more than the equivalent of VMware Server. The same performance challenges they've always had. It doesn't have live migrate, but the management's pretty good.
Yeah, the System Center, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
The way and I think you're right. Okay, they might end up managing a couple of other environments. They have they say that they can manage VMware.
Yeah.
So that is also another approach of trying to say, hypervisor, I cannot fight you from under to commoditize you. We can try to enforce our strength from the management, which is Microsoft's strength.
That's right.
Which is with all due respect for the guys of how they worked and on that space. So it's a very complicated market. How is it, getting back into the, how is it, how do we survive in this market? I think it's really very hot.
Yeah.
And then I go to my customer on my day job, so
right.
It's hard to tell them and not have a shoe or something thrown at your head. Like, we're sick and tired of all the whole virtualization and aggression and fighting and what's the real value? What kind of a real value can I get?
Yeah.
I have two things that I need to connect. I have people, my consumers, my users, and I have applications that need to be able to work, because eventually that's what they do in that 8 hour or whatever longer kind of period per day.
Exactly.
And that is that real value. How is it to survive in that kind of a scenario as being virtualized?
Yeah, I think that for a company like us, we can't, so you're right, there's a lot of noise, right? You've got, especially with VMware having missed their last quarter, right? I mean, the financial analyst community is so fickle. So 1 minute...
They missed $5 million, right?
Yeah, they missed $5 million on a $400 million quarter.
412, and they had, so it's amazing. And the price, the stock price, it dropped from 80 to like 56 point something, and they're up right now on 60 or something, I don't know.
Yeah, it was priced for perfection.
It's very painful.
It's very painful, but I think that the key is, right, as an entrepreneur, as a serial entrepreneur, you cannot allow your competition to distract you. And at the end of the day, if you focus on your customers, your specific customers, and you understand what they need and what they want from you, and you deliver that to them, it doesn't really matter a whole lot what's going on around you. And I think that's the key. So many companies, right, their competitor gets a cold and they catch pneumonia. And if you allow yourself to stay somewhat contained within, this is our customer space, this is what our reason for existence is, this is where we bring value, other things can happen around you, and that's fine. But there's a lot of sniping going on, right? And clearly between ZenSource and VMware, and we've tried for the most part to just stay out of that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I think. I have met a lot of people at C-level, executive level, and I see that a lot of people are kind of gradually, not stealthily, but gradually, happily, just enjoying their growth. And while we are seeing this kind of a fight, but we should not even undermine the fact that Microsoft, Citrix, and VMware, they are in the front line, and they are there's lots of salespeople are walking across in the customer rooms. Yeah. And that distraction kind of can cloud you, but it's good to see that a lot of firms are still having that, like you said, year to year, double-digit growth. So that's a good figure. So it is challenging, like you mentioned, but their relationships, how do you work with those relationships with these people? Because it's more like an adversarial relationship, right? You just can't say, Citrix, I don't care, or Microsoft, if you don't want to work with
and we don't. I mean, VMware clearly, given their success, they have postured, and working with VMware, I don't think anybody would disagree with this. They're hard to work with, right?
But why is that? I mean, let's be honest.
I think that they've gotten arrogant, quite frankly. I think that their success has bred a level of arrogance. I think that they've become real bullies. They push around their channel partners, they push around their technology partners, they push around their resellers. They do a lot of things that I would say are questionable in terms of, what we would consider good business practices, fair business practices
sort
today.
of ethics and
Yeah.
it might sound weird in this world of business, but eventually, at some point of time, I remember reading an article, one of a very good friend, an analyst, he was talking, I think he writes for ZD blog, ZNet.
Yeah.
And he was talking about partnership, friendship, faith, relationships. These are important things, and
Right.
I think we're into a totally new age. When I look at young people, they communicate on a totally different level.
Yeah.
Faith is very important,
Right.
and as a salesperson, you have to develop, establish faith. And if you cannot sell your faith, your product is the second level, that you don't know what's going to happen. You partnered with VMware, whatever, but they might suddenly deviate from a strategy and that
Right.
unpredictable kind of move, and suddenly I don't know what to say anymore.
Right. I
That's
mean,
challenging.
VMware's in a very unique position, right? So they're owned by EMC, and the majority of the VMware board are EMC executives. EMC is managing VMware for their own earnings, okay? And unfortunately, that puts VMware in a very awkward position because VMware cannot do what's right for the customer. They have to do
And
what
maybe
EMC...
for what's right
Yeah.
for them, maybe they would be
Right.
very happy being
Yeah.
independent, or
Yeah. So the challenge, I think, is because, and we saw this, as you just said, Terry, with, you have a $400 million quarter, you miss by $5 million, and you get crushed by the capital markets. You see a situation where every penny per share is so critical that they do unnaturally aggressive things to get any order. So you see a lot of times, and we hear this from their resellers constantly, they'll work with a reseller on a deal until the 11th hour, and just before the quarter is going to close, VMware salespeople will go in and they will take the deal directly, right? They'll basically stab their partner in the back. But they want, they want to preserve that extra, 15 or 18% margin, and they're willing to do a lot for that earnings per share goal. Now, again, I understand that, when you're managing a public company, it requires a different level of mentality, but at some point, I've seen this repeatedly with other companies that have been very successful, there's a backlash that happens. Now, you also asked about Microsoft, and I think that we work very well with Microsoft. And yes, we certainly will compete with Microsoft and Hyper-V, but we have been a charter member, a charter supporter of the Microsoft hard disk initiative. ISD, so we've been supporting that, and I think that's a de facto standard that we've been using. We entered into an interoperability agreement with Microsoft last August. Microsoft announced in November at Tech Forum in Barcelona that they are extending the benefits of what they call this virtualization validation program. We were the first independent vendor where they said they would support our customers regardless of the service level agreement. So we're doing everything we can with Microsoft, but at the same time, and certainly 90% of our customers today are running Windows Server guests in our environment. So we coexist with Microsoft, and I think they have become easier to coexist with than maybe they were 10 years ago.
And especially with the global conditions that we are in today, we are in a totally different, just like globalization 3.0 kind of phase, like Thomas Friedman says.
Right.
You have to compete on totally different levels, and now you are virtual iron, sorry. And it's easier for you guys to sell your product because of your competitive advantage on pricing, even in U.S. You look at mortgage market and financial markets, they're all consolidating. And when people say consolidating, people think you can consolidate data center, but no, the consolidation is an employee base. You got to do something with that. Right. And when you consolidate, like you want to really consolidate. So while I'm consolidating, it does not mean that I spend again a huge amount of money. And I'm sure a lot of people see that price comparison also when they say, now we want to move our data center, for example, it could be Merrill Lynch, Credit Suisse, or whatever. Yep. When they're kind of imploding, they would want to take care that they choose the right decisions, have a software that does what it does, that should do what it do. And if I have people in the call center who just need to open a couple of small applications, why buy some fat product which could do billions of kind of calculations. Yeah. So how are the sales? My whole question was coming to the sales in U.S. Are they affected, or are you still on earth?
No, we really haven't seen. And again, it may be. So here's the interesting statistic. If you look at the tech recession of sort of the 99 to 2002 timeframe, large and very large enterprises, their IT budgets declined by about 6%. If you look at small and mid-sized enterprises during that same period, their IT budgets actually increased by 11%. So I'm not going to sit here and say I have a crystal ball and that the past will repeat itself, but at least based on history of the last known recent experience we've had, small and mid-sized IT budgets have actually been somewhat recession-proof. And I really believe it's because, in general, they don't waste any money on IT. They spend it only when they need it, right? They manage their businesses differently. And so as they're growing, they've got to align IT with their businesses in support of their business growth, and they'll continue to buy. So time will only tell us, Terry. I have,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't have a crystal ball, but I do
Yeah.
kind of, in a way, agree with that part of that.
Yeah.
Looking back into the past, in fact, lately, I'm reading books from the 18th century. Can you
Right.
imagine?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
but there's a lot to be learned from the 18th century.
Still.
Yeah.
But there was globalization back then as well.
That's
so
right.
I wrote an article where I quoted Grandinetti, the wave,
Yeah.
the 50-year cycle that every
Yeah.
revolution has.
Right.
So we are into that curve when we are kind of heading down.
Yeah.
And the next is conceptual. That's a transformational age,
Yeah.
probably in the next 10 years, because we are at the downward spiral of that Grandinetti. We moved away from the industrial,
Yeah.
and then we went into the automobile, and then you have IT cycle. You know the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
So
you and I should exchange our book list, because I love some of that. That history
should.
is one of the most
I
productive
also started,
ever.
I also started.
Yeah.
I'm reading Peter Drucker's book.
Okay.
So he has done
Yeah.
studies
Right.
from the 30s.
Yeah.
Okay, all that work. He's 1909. He's
Yeah, right.
that's
Oh,
when
yeah.
he was born, right?
Yeah.
So from 1930s, the book was published in the 73s. So I think there's a lot to learn. Sometimes you can look in the past and
Yeah.
try to help shape the future. And I think it's a good. It could be a good lesson for a young, strong,
Yeah.
and fast company like VMware to kind of help come up with a strategy to start collaborating, co-creating
Right.
the pie the way it grows.
Yeah, that's
Something
right.
like-
It's not a zero-sum game. I think they play it like it's a zero-sum game, but it's never a zero-sum
Yeah,
game.
that's not the way the world is.
Yeah. Exactly.
So about your partner system,
Yeah.
in fact, when you said SMB,
Yeah.
I'm going to try to show you something. I was just
Yeah.
outside,
Sure.
and one of your partners,
Yes.
I said the same things which you're saying, and I'm not kidding. So you guys
Yeah.
can take a look yourself.
Right.
He started laughing when I said virtual iron. Oh yeah, what do you think about virtual iron?
Yeah.
So I said virtual iron is great, for SMB, and he was laughing. And I said, why do you laugh? He says, we are in an enterprise.
Yeah.
Virtual
Yeah.
iron.
Right.
Now this is a French
Yeah,
firm.
yeah.
Spanish firm.
Yes.
Ivratech. So
Yeah,
you
okay.
guys are in an enterprise as well.
Oh, we certainly are, and I think that it's important to note that the product as it exists today, right? The product works. It's been subjected to a lot of independent, very rigorous lab reviews by eWeek and InfoWorld, and we beat VMware's ESX product head-to-head in a Windows IT Pro lab-based challenge where we won Windows IT Pro Editor's Choice. The product works extremely well. The reason I don't emphasize enterprise, because we will get our fair share, is that large enterprises are, in general, very conservative. And they're going to typically want to work with the company that's had the incumbency of 10 years, right? And so they've had a history of letting VMware prove themselves out in their labs and in their sandboxes over a period. You have to earn the right to own an enterprise. And I think if you have the appropriate level of patience and the right perspective, over time we will become more and more embedded in the enterprise. And yes, we have some really marquee names in Europe. We have them in Asia Pac. We have them in the United States. But I think in general, to try to go head-to-head into VMware's strength right now would not be the most appropriate strategy for the
I
company.
sometimes wonder myself,
Yeah.
like, hey, which option would one choose?
Yeah.
Great product and hard to manage practices,
Yes.
or a
Right.
good product and good practices?
Yeah.
Great practices.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general,
When I say practices, I mean also mean
yeah.
kind of not just the product management
Right.
Capabilities, but also
Yeah.
the whole life cycle of how do I take care and how do I upgrade, how do
Yeah.
I go on with my business.
Yeah, I think that the latter would be advantageous most of the time. I think that,
To the consumer as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you know, I teach at MIT, and yet, one of my messages constantly in front of my classes, don't worship at the altar of technology. It's about so much more than the technology. There are all the assets around the technology. If you make it easier for your customers to consume and use and maintain and manage the technology, now you've done something useful. But to just give them, and we just saw this, just in the last week or two, right? The Blu-ray thing got blown out, right? Everybody would tell you that Blu-ray was vastly superior, reminiscent of the whole VHS versus Betamax thing of 20 years ago. The best technology rarely, if ever, wins. And you have to understand the holistic cycle around it.
Okay, I'm not going to draw any analogies or
Yeah.
comparisons. I'm just going to state an example. Fortunately, I don't think I have blogged, so I'm not in any controversial
Yeah,
position.
right.
but you heard of William Shockley.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Great mind.
Yes.
And the only thing that he did was give us great technologies.
Right.
But they were not coming out of his lab. He had this traders, how was the term he used? Traders 4 or
Yeah.
Traders 8?
Okay.
The guys who left.
Yeah, yeah, the treacherous 8 or something like that.
Treacherous, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it depends on what kind of,
Yeah.
you know, in which mode do you want to sit? You could be really great, brilliant,
Yeah, yeah,
and smart,
right.
and I mean, but you have to kind of delegate that kind of the technological insight and vision to be able to provide that kind of, you know, your product to your industry, and that would sustain. The sustainability is important, I think.
That's
It's not
exactly
just-
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, people, as cliche as it's going to sound, Terry, people buy from people. And when you have been abused by your vendor, when an alternative appears,
yeah.
when an alternative appears, at some point, you know, the human part of you, not the economic part, will make the decision. Now, again, VMware has had zero competition for a very long time. So there haven't really been very viable alternatives. But I think with Microsoft in the market, with what we've been able to deliver in a very short period of time, with some of the other vendors we all know, you know, there are more choices than ever before. And again, your point about studying history, I mean, you and I both can recite many examples of companies that
Absolutely.
have gotten ahead of themselves. And I've seen some in the Boston market. We've seen many in Silicon Valley. You know, history repeats itself. That's why we study it.
Yes, absolutely. That's why we studied.
Yeah.
So that's Virtual Iron. You have obviously you're in Europe. You're pretty much you know, expanding. What are the expansions strategies in Asia?
Yeah.
Other
So
markets?
yeah, I mean, you know, as a young company, we've been global from the start. So about 20-25% of our business comes from the EMEA region. About 20-25% today coming from Asia Pac. And I think over time you're going to see even higher percentages coming from outside North America, because the North American continent, especially the United States market, is by far the most fiercely competitive, and it's where VMware is the most entrenched.
Did Ed Walsh inclusion in your team, did it help?
Yeah, I think what Ed brings.
Heard about him. He's a really
Yeah.
energetic, good guy. And
Yeah, I think what Ed brings and his colleague John McCarthy brings is they come into the company at a time when it's no longer, just as we've been talking about the product. It's really about distribution and global reach. And I think what both John and Ed have done in their careers as sales executives is they understand how to build global distribution. At a time when clearly, you know, Citrix is now buying XenSource, and Citrix has had a large channel, and VMware continues to expand. So they bring that level of experience, but they also bring deep storage industry experience. And one of the things that we're seeing...
Yeah, Ed is from EMC, right?
Well, Ed was most recently at EMC, but he came that way via acquisition. He was the CEO of a company called Avamar, which is a data duplication company. John McCarthy is a gentleman who early in his career took EMC from a very small revenue number to a multi-billion-dollar revenue number as VP of North American sales. So he was he was the guy that was there at the creation. And if you meet John, you know, he's one of the most impressive guys I've ever had the privilege of working with. I think the world of the guy.
So it's really great to have exciting staff. You need to have good, strong, ethical leadership, and I always believe that's the most important thing. I think it's just like running a home eventually.
Yeah, that's right.
You have a great family if you have a great father. I mean, you need a father. You have a mother figure.
Right.
Be a chief operating officer.
Right. Sure. Exactly.
Sort of, but you need to have a good CEO you can look up to, who can make you work, but who can take care of you.
Yeah. No, and Ed brings an abundance of energy at a time when this market is just on fire, and so I think he brings the right energy level, the right mentality to the business.
So at Virtual Iron, I think you guys are doing a really excellent job. I mean, I have a lot of questions on hypervisor, but you guys, we can cover that up also. Do you guys have a booth here? Oh, no,
we don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, obviously.
We don't know.
Yeah, we checked on that.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to cover you guys on a video in Vegas. Definitely.
That's great.
So we're going to see the product. How I have downloaded and tested the product several occasions. So that's great. Just before ending, I'm really curious. What do you do at MIT?
Yeah. So MIT is a labor of love for me. So I wound up. A long time ago, while I was still a consultant at McKinsey & Company. I had no entrepreneurial experience in my family. I really didn't know what technology entrepreneurship was. And one night on a study with a client, I wandered into an MIT Enterprise Forum event. And this whole parallel universe opened up. And it was an MIT Enterprise Forum chapter meeting. And it intrigued me enough that I decided I wanted to become an entrepreneur. So I left McKinsey, and I began my entrepreneurial career in Boston about 17, 18 years ago. Very soon after moving to Boston to become a software entrepreneur with the first of what is now my 5th consecutive venture, I was asked by some of the students who I was mentoring if I would come in and meet with some of them, and I was introduced to a professor there, and they asked me to give a guest lecture on marketing, and I love to lecture. It's something I've always enjoyed, and MIT liked what I said enough to invite me more permanently. And so I wound up getting deeply involved in the community. I've been a senior lecturer there for 11 years. I teach in the Entrepreneurship Development Program. I teach a course called Starting and Building a Successful High-Tech Venture. I've been a judge in their entrepreneurship competition for, until recently, the better part of the last 12 years. And I spend a lot of my spare time there. And the reason I do, Terry, very simply is it feeds my passion. There's an entrepreneurial community there that, other than Stanford, just doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. And there's a multi-generational history of technology entrepreneurship.
I think that I was speaking to Tamar Newberger. She's the vice president at Catbird, and she, then we go into a little bit of political. She has good contacts with Obama.
Yeah, sure.
And they know personally. They know each other personally.
Sure.
And then then I say we as people who look at U.S., but I have a family there, and we want U.S. to be the kind of country that it was with innovation. Having people like you in MIT. There's this chief technology officer at HP. I forgot his name.
Okay, Mott, is it Randy? No, Mott's CIO.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not
Georgia, right? Georgia and GI.
That I don't know. I know the chief strategy guy.
He's
don't
doing
know.
amazing things.
Yeah.
You know what he's combining technology.